Yes.
Get ready to take control of your own financial destiny. It's time to build your dream business. Welcome to the Empowered Entrepreneur.
This just got exciting.
With your host, Spider Graham. Your education starts now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the broadcast. This is Spider Graham. And this time around, I want to take on a topic that is actually probably one of the most important things that we really can discuss regarding business, regarding personal relationships, and regarding living a better life, and that is managing our fear. I don't need to tell you that you probably have moments when you feel uncomfortable in life. Getting pushed outside your comfort zone, whatever we call it, there are times when we just really feel like we'd rather not have that happen. There are things that happen to us that we don't like. And a lot of times we can really break this down into what we would just basically and commonly describe as fear. Now, fear is not necessarily things jumping out of closets or a fear of snakes or whatever that is, although that's certainly part of it. Fear is something that pushes us away from what we might want because there's something in the way. When we look at what motivates human beings and how our behaviors are driven to begin with, there are actually two factors that are really, really key in how we do almost everything we do every single day, how we make decisions, how we plan our lives. And those are based upon the fact that, and this is a human thing, it's a mammal thing as well, based upon self-preservation and based upon keeping ourselves happy and healthy. And that is, we will continually make decisions based upon things that drive us toward pleasure and away from pain. We're hardwired for that. We are constantly seeking pleasure and constantly trying to avoid things that hurt us. Now, this makes lots of sense if you want to live a long life, because people who are heading toward pain a lot, that's not very healthy. It's not going to do you well for the long run. Now, this hardwiring is part of who we are. So we expect, and by the way, we do things constantly to make sure that we don't get hurt. We're constantly trying not to hurt ourselves. We eat on a regular basis because if we don't eat, it becomes painful, right? It becomes uncomfortable. If we don't sleep on a regular basis, nature will take care of it for us, but it becomes uncomfortable. And so this discomfort is pain. Well, at the other side of the spectrum is what we might call fear. And fear is a form of pain. And actually, I like to think of fear as really kind of a form of growing pains. They're emotional growing pains. And fear most often happens when we are doing something, when we are stretching ourselves into something new. Okay, we're experiencing something that is unfamiliar and often unwelcome. Now, it can be really deep fear. I mean, it can be a fear that is so absolute that you just lose your mind. I mean, fear of, someone's holding a gun to your head and threatening to kill you, unless you give them your wallet. Okay, that kind of fear. The fear that comes around being involved in war, the fear that comes being in the middle of some sort of a natural disaster. These are all real, and I'm not certainly poo-pooing the whole idea of fear. But what I do want to talk about is that when we talk about business and life, a lot of the fears that we deal with on a regular basis aren't real. And this is a hard thing to kind of wrap your mind around. A lot of the times we have the tendency to be afraid of things that could happen. Not things that are happening, but things that might happen. And a lot of times the things that might happen could be, well, if I don't do this, I'll lose my job. Or if I don't do and behave in a certain way, then my spouse won't love me anymore and will leave, or whatever it is. Okay? There are a lot of the things that we maintain our own behaviors based upon our constant fear that if we don't do something, something else will happen. And I'm not saying this is incorrect, but I am saying that sometimes we worry about things that really aren't going to happen. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody in which you had a horrible disagreement, in which you got into a screaming match, okay, your boss, let's say, somebody you worked with, and it just went so bad, but it actually never took place because it was all in your own head? Right? I'm not the only person who's done this. I have made myself absolutely miserable having a fight with somebody that I never had a fight with. And it's always a scenario like, well, I'm going to go into work and he's going to say this, and I'm going to say this, and he's going to say this, and then I'm going to say this, and then he's going to say this, and you go to work and he doesn't say that, and you don't say that, and it never happens. Meanwhile, you're making yourself miserable because you're going through the same process. You're going through the absolute same process that you would go through if you were actually having a fight with someone emotionally, right? So the fear sometimes gets in the way of our happiness because we're too busy making ourselves frightened to really say, hey, I don't need to do this. Now, when we look at fear, fear is actually an incredibly important tool for growth. And once again, it's not the kind of thing that the average person would say, how many people here would like to be frightened? How many people here would like to feel fear and be uncomfortable? Okay, not a lot of hands go up. But one of the things we have discovered through time is that by embracing the things that scare us and doing the things that are frightening, that's where growth is. That's where opportunity is. Now, here's a couple things I want you to think about. When you find yourself in a scenario when you're looking at, say, well, if I do that, that's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be scary. You have to ask yourself, all right, if you're feeling this way about this circumstance, what are the possibilities that other people also feel the same way about this circumstance? I need to make some sales calls today, but I get on the phone and these people, they're not nice to me, and it could go wrong and people could yell at me, and I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of feeling bad. I'm afraid of people being mean to me. You know what? Absolutely. You get it. But here's the difference. Do you think anybody else is going through there going, I have no fear, I'll do it anyway? No, it's just, this superhero mentality. We all feel fear. We feel different types of fear and in different ways maybe. But there are plenty of people who are going to look at that same scenario and say, yeah, this is scaring the heck out of me. I don't want to do it either. But here's the difference. If somebody say, well, I don't want to make these phone calls because I'm afraid to do that, and you're saying, I'm afraid to make those phone calls, but I'm going to do it anyway, that's all the difference. And so now you're in a situation where you're doing things that you're frightened of, but you're doing them. And instead of letting them become obstacles that get in your way, you brush past the fear. You do it, and guess what happens? Well, the person who makes the sales calls is the one getting the sales. The guy who's not doing it, or the woman who's not doing it, is not making the sales. Okay? Now, this is obviously a very simple example, but when you embrace fear sometimes, you do the things that other people aren't willing to do. So, not that life is always a race, but you are competing against other people for your livelihood sometimes. And if you're doing the things that they're not doing or that they're not willing to do because it's uncomfortable or they're frightened of it, then you already have an advantage. So sometimes just taking the initiative and doing something you don't want to do because it's uncomfortable is going to push you well past the competition because you're going to be doing things in your life that other people are not willing to do. Now, we all feel fear, and sometimes we feel fear in some really surprising ways. Now, there's phobias. We all deal with things that we consider very personal fears. People are afraid of certain animals and spiders and snakes and bees and heights and going outside and whatever that is. But there's a problem sometimes with the fears that we identify with because we bring them in as part of our character. And by the way, I guarantee you walk up to just about anybody on the street and you say, hey, what are you phobic about? Do you have a phobia? Almost everyone will say, yeah, here's something I'm afraid of. And in a lot of ways, they're okay with it. They're saying, yeah, I'm afraid of spiders, but I'm okay with it. By the way, don't be afraid of spiders. Spiders are good. But the point is that it becomes part of our self-identity. Okay, I'm the kind of person who's frightened by this. Now, sometimes it's a harmless thing. Okay, if it doesn't really affect your life in any big way, all right, yeah, you don't like snakes. Okay, so don't spend a lot of time hanging out with snakes. You'll probably do fine. But if it's like, well, I'm afraid of talking to strangers at parties, or I'm afraid of leaving my house, then you probably have a real mess on your hands from a lifestyle standpoint. Now, true story for me. And I've not been afraid of a lot of things. I'm not afraid of animals, and I'm not afraid of natural disasters and things like that. But when I was growing up, I was terrified, absolutely terrified of the idea of flying in an airplane. Now, for those of you who've flown in airplanes a lot, you're probably like, well, yeah, maybe they can be a little scary, but not that much, and certainly not phobic about it. Well, I was. And I was phobic to the point where, seriously, if you talk to me about, flying in an airplane, I could actually start shaking. I could make myself so frightened just visualizing the idea of getting in an airplane. Now, by the way, had never been in an airplane before, okay? Fortunately or unfortunately, I lived in a family where air travel was not something we could afford or did on a regular basis. But at some point in my life, I was in my early 20s, and it occurred to me that if I never got in an airplane in my life, I would be missing an awful lot of opportunity. At that point in my life, I always had this dream that someday I would go to Europe. I would visit England. I would go to these places that I wanted to see. And I said, well, you know what? I'll take a boat. Like, this is an option. I'm not even sure how to take a boat to Europe if I wanted to do it today. Right? It's one of those things. So I'm telling myself, well, I don't need to get an airplane. I have alternatives. Well, it wasn't much of an alternative in a lot of ways. And as much as I was trying to talk myself out of my fear or make it okay for me to have this fear, I knew deep down it wasn't something I wanted. So I made the decision to get on an airplane. Okay? By the way, this is not a minor phobia. I am scared out of my mind. But I do it because I understand that on the other side of the fear, there's a lot more possibility. And if I let this fear control my life, I'm giving up all of this opportunity for the future. So I go to the airport and I get on a shuttle. Now, this is back in the early days where you could actually go to the airport, buy a ticket, get on an airplane. It was a lot easier process. And I'm flying between Boston and New York. And I think halfway down the gangplank, I stopped salivating completely. I was so caught about, my heart is just trip hammering. I'm almost passing out. I'm so frightened. And I get into the plane, and the stewardess is there. And I actually said to her something I've never flown before, and I'm terrified. Like, sharing it was going to make it better. And she said, I'm sure you'll be fine. And so I get in the plane, and I'm sitting there, and I'm trying to ignore that I'm on an airplane. I'm trying to play this mind game. You're on a bus. I've been on lots of buses. Buses don't scare me. Airplanes, scared. But, airplanes are kind of like buses if you don't look out the window. So I'm sitting there in this airplane, and I'm trying to play this mind game with myself. And at some point, we pull away from the gate. And there's that moment of lurch where you're like, we're moving. And my brain goes nuts, and my heart is just bang, 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 bang. And I'm thinking, I don't have any choice anymore. I can't get off this aircraft. I'm going to have to fly. And so we taxi, and I'm just scared. I'm just absolutely terrified. And then finally we get on the runway, and the jet engines get up to full tilt, and we rumble on down the runway. And I stayed conscious. That's the best thing I can say about it, because for someone as frightened as I was, it was probably a minor miracle that I was not passing out. And we went up in the air, and after climbing for a few minutes, we leveled off. And it felt kind of normal. It wasn't horrible bumpy. I was in an airplane, and part of my brain was going, you did it. You flew. You're flying in an airplane. And I had a certain amount of pride that I had conquered this thing that was so terrifying to me. And about 45 minutes later, if you've ever flown between New York and Boston, it's not that far to fly. It takes about 6 hours on a bus, which I had done many times. But about 45 minutes later, I landed in New York. And my brain went, what? 45 minutes? I've spent so much time traveling between these two cities on a bus. This is like magic. I can do this. Anyway, I got off the plane. I went in. I had a meeting I needed to go to. I actually had to go give a speech that day. Give you a sense of where I was at. I'm going to give a public speech, and I'm not concerned about that at all. That's not scary to me. The plane is the scary thing. But I go into the city. I give my speech. It goes very well. I go back out to the airport, and I wait for my airplane. I have to get back home, right? I don't have any other way to get there. And by the way, I've already flown here. Might as well fly back. So I get in the airplane. I grabbed a window seat. And when the plane took off, I looked out the window, and I watched the entire process between airports flying back to Boston. And it was magical. It was incredible to look out the window and to see the perspective of the world from, 20,000 feet or whatever we were flying at that day. It was something I had never experienced before. And yeah, it caused me a little bit of trepidation. But by the time I landed in Boston, guess what? I had flown in 2 airplanes that day. I had managed to do something that I thought I would never be able to do. It didn't kill me. Yep, it scared me plenty, but I did it fine. And by the way, the trip back, I wasn't nearly as frightened as I was on the trip going there. My point for sharing this story is that by doing something that scared me, I got used to it. I don't know how many hours I've spent in airplanes since then, okay? I've been on several hundred aircraft in my life, and the reality is that, I don't always love it. I'm cognizant of the fact that once upon a time this really scared me, but it really doesn't anymore because I also know what to expect. And this is a huge part of conquering our fears, when we have expectations that go along with it. So for example, just a quick share, the first time I was on the airplane when we took off and the landing gear went up and I heard and felt this clunk, clunk, my brain went, both the engines just fell off. True story. Okay, making myself more miserable, making myself more neurotic. Okay, now I'm on an airplane and I hear the clunk clunk. I go, oh, the landing gear just got put away. It's natural. It's normal. It's what you want to have happen. Okay, so your expectations change, and the more you're in an airplane, what feels normal, you know what to expect. You know what takeoff feels like. You know what landing feels like. You know what turbulence feels like. You understand all of these things, and you go with it. And I've flown around the world, and I've opened the freedom, and I've seen cities and countries that I always wanted to see. And I got there flying an aircraft. So that phobia is gone, and I'm thankful that it's gone, and I'm so thankful that I've managed to talk myself out of keeping that as part of my identity and part of my character. And I think we all have the power to do that. Yes, you have to face some really tough things sometimes. You have to scare yourself half to death sometimes. But on the other side of it, there can be some huge, huge advantages. Now, I bring all of this up because I think when we work in business, being pushed outside our comfort zone is something that most of us don't really care for. But that's where growth happens. If we stay with all that we're comfortable with, we have the tendency to stagnate. Now, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs as a coach, and I have one. She's a dear, dear woman, and she runs a company that does landscaping and some really cool things. But she also has set some limitations on how much money she makes every year because she really didn't think about setting any long-term goals or figuring out how to make more, how to grow her business. And so we're sitting down and we're talking about her business plan. We're talking about, well, what does the business look like? How are you going to grow this thing in the future? And I'm giving her some homework. I'm saying, okay, you need to think about some of these things. You need to do an analysis of what your competitors are doing. You need to think about what you do better than they do and what they might do better than you. And you have to have an understanding. And so she sat down and she was very diligent about her work and putting it together. I said, okay, this is really good. Now we need to talk about marketing. We need to talk about how you're going to get the word out there so that people know that you exist and that you can help them in these areas. And so I said, let's work on a marketing plan and let's talk about what you can do. She's like, well, I want to run an ad. I said, well, okay, what kind of ad and what is it for? Well, there's a local shopper and I want to put an ad in there because I want to let people know we do. I say, well, is that really the best use of your time and money? Is that going to get you what you really want? Or would it make more sense for you to go and call some of these people on the phone and make some calls and deal with those things? Well, as we've already discussed, sometimes getting on the phone with people can be frightening. And so she didn't really want to do that, but she gave it lip service and talked about it. So I kind of left her to her own devices saying, okay, well, there are certain things that you need to do to get the word out there and figure out what it is. Well, the next time I talked to her, she said, hey, good news. I ordered T-shirts. I said, oh, really? T-shirts? She goes, yeah. She's going to have my name and the name of the company and the address and our phone number on the T-shirts, and my crew will wear the T-shirts. I said, okay. How is that helping you reach your goals? Well, people will see the T-shirts. Uh-huh. Where? The people you're trying to reach or just anybody? Well, and once again, I don't have anything against the idea of creating T-shirts, but what she did is she went towards something that she was comfortable with. She went towards something that was easy for her to understand and to manage and to do, and she went away from the things that were hard for her. So I bring this up because we all have the tendency to do this. Remember, we walk away from pain toward pleasure, and sometimes we do the things that we're comfortable with because we're comfortable with them. And to do the things we're not comfortable with means to embrace our fear and to embrace that discomfort. And it's very important when we grow in life and as business owners and entrepreneurs. It's incredibly important that we constantly push ourselves outside of our comfort zones. I'm not saying it's always pleasant, but it's the kind of thing that the more we do something that is uncomfortable, the less uncomfortable it becomes. The first time I gave a speech in public, once again, I was in my early 20s, and I had about 300 people in the audience, which was, for me, that was a pretty big audience to begin with. And I stood up there and spoke to these people for about 15 minutes, and I was so grateful. I was absolutely so grateful there was a lectern in front of me so nobody could see how bad my legs were shaking. Okay, it's like a duck. Everything above the surface looked calm, cool, and collected. Everything below the surface was just a mess and moving all over the place. But I did it. I was able to pull it off. And the next time I gave a speech, I had more expectations about how I would react to it, how my audience would react, and I became more comfortable then. I now speak all over the world. I love to speak in public. Okay? Do I still get butterflies? Absolutely. There are times that you kind of look out at the audience and say, all right, do I have it all together? And then you say, you know what? I trust myself at this point. I know what to expect. I know how to deliver the message. I know how to reach the people I need to reach, and I know how to engage them. Okay? Yeah, I may have to wing it from time to time, and I may have to figure out how to make this up as I go along. You know what? I'm pretty good at that too. So I do it. But the reason I'm so comfortable with it today is because I had plenty of time doing it when I wasn't comfortable. I had a situation once, true story. I'm in New York City. I'm doing a presentation. There are about 1,000 people in the audience. This is a big crowd, okay? I'm excited, but I'm also a bit nervous, I'll be honest with you. And I've got my computer with me that's plugged into the monitor system, and I want to show off some really cool things. And I walk up and I say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. I want to share a few things with you. And I go and I push a button on my computer, and the blue screen of death pops up. Pow! Large as life. And my brain goes, ah! And I think, oh, no. Everything I want to show, all my notes, all the things I'm going to do to engage this audience are on my computer. My computer has just crashed. And I know by the time it gets rebooted, my time will be up. And I can't just say to the crowd, hey, listen, yeah, I want to do this and all, but I got to reboot my computer first. So let's just wait a few minutes while I get that to happen. It doesn't happen. The show must go on. And so I tap danced. I just said, well, I wanted to show you some things, but you know what? I'm going to have to talk about them instead. And you just go with the flow. And you just maintain a calm exterior. Meanwhile, inside you're freaking out a little bit. It is what it is. And you do it. And you know what? Some of the best feedback I've ever gotten in my life from an audience came from that presentation, because I just had to do what I had to do. And I did a really good job, in spite of the fact that it terrified me in a lot of ways. So push yourself outside your comfort zone. You don't have to terrify yourself every day, but there's a fantastic quote by Eleanor Roosevelt that says, do something every day that scares you. And I absolutely believe in the power of fear. And the more you do something, the less that fear becomes. And the other side of this, and the other message I want to leave with you is, don't let fear rule your life. If something scares you, figure out how to become master of it. If you don't do things all the time because you're afraid of what might happen, then you're living only half your life. Everybody out there, you look at anybody who's very successful and very accomplished, and I will tell you, one of the things they have in common is they've all experienced a lot more fear than people who haven't accomplished anything. True story. So do what you can to push yourself outside your comfort zone. Do things that are uncomfortable. Do things that allow you to grow. If there's something that you're already afraid of, face it. Deal with it. Do something to make it go away. And over time, you're going to be a lot less fearful and a lot stronger. And frankly, you're going to be a lot happier too. Anyway, that's all I have for this broadcast. Thank you so much for joining me once again. It's Spider Graham, and I will see you next time.
For more free resources and advice for entrepreneurs, visit spidergraham.com and become a subscriber today.